So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are watching us from. Welcome to the fifth session of the Global Cybersecurity Forum. My name is Oscar Avila. I'm the president of the ISOC Cybersecurity SIG, and I'm delighted to kick off the session inclusive cyber policy making involving stakeholders in cyber policy development, Africa focus. So this webinar is co-organized with Global Partners Digital, and I would like to make a couple of announcements. Please keep your mic off during the session. Use the chat box to formulate your comments and questions to speakers. And we will have a Q&A session at the end. So let me introduce our esteemed, it's kind of keynote and the moderator, Daniela Schnidrig. Thank you, Daniela. She is the manager of the capacity building program at the Global Partners Digital and also co-organizer of this webinar. Daniela, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Oscar, and thanks everyone. So my name is Daniela Schnidrig. I'm a senior program lead at GPD, Global Partners Digital, and I will be your moderator today. So I would like to share with you some background information for this session and some introductory thoughts. So we at GPD, we're a civil society organization. We are based in the UK, but work with partners around the world. And essentially, we focus on fostering a cyberspace that is underpinned by human rights. And in our cyber work in particular, we see the interplay between cybersecurity and human rights and how strong cybersecurity is key to be able to enable people to exercise their human rights online. And this is something that has become more and more apparent, I think, in these current circumstances and these unprecedented times that we're in. So we focus on understanding how we can foster a cyberspace where these threats that are very real and they're increasing in number and they're becoming more and more sophisticated. So how can we tackle those threats in a way that is efficient and is robust while keeping cyberspace free and open? And this is a complex challenge and there is no one-size-fits-all solution, as we know. However, we see two key needs. And the first one is we need cybersecurity policies and laws that are human rights respecting by design. And we also need cybersecurity laws and policies that are developed in an open, inclusive, and transparent way. And these two go hand in hand. And the way we see it, the more inclusive a process is, the more likely it is that human rights perspectives will be reflected in those discussions. So in line with this, we have developed a toolkit that is called Toolkit for Inclusive and Value-Based Cyber Policymaking. And the toolkit aims to provide guidance on how to involve stakeholders in the development, implementation, and review of national cybersecurity strategies. So it is focused on strategies, but I think there's a lot there that can be applicable to other types of cyber policies. And the guidance that we provide in this toolkit reflects the learnings and takeaways from working with different partners in different countries over the last 6 years. Actually, some of the brilliant panelists that we've got on the session today, we've worked with in the past. So in addition to that concrete guidance, what the toolkit offers as well are concrete examples of stakeholder engagement in cyber policy development and implementation. So I will be sharing the link to the toolkit in the chat box, and do feel free to check it out. And if you do have any suggestions or feedback on it, on how we can improve it or make it grow more, do let me know. But with that context in mind, and since it is Cybersecurity Month, Oscar, who is the founder of ISOC Cybersecurity SIG, he approached us with the idea to have this webinar and to look at the value of stakeholder engagement in cyber policy development. And it does have a focus on the African region. So That is what we'll be doing today, and we have a group of brilliant speakers who represent different stakeholder groups, and they all have experience with cyber policy development and implementation, and they'll be sharing their insight with us about how stakeholder engagement can help promote a free, open, and secure cyberspace. So I've asked each of our panelists to kick off the discussion with some brief thoughts about certain things. So I've asked them to think about how they see the value of stakeholder engagement in cyber policymaking processes. What are some good examples, concrete examples of good practices of stakeholder engagement in cyber processes? To our cyber civil society and academic folks, I've asked them to reflect on perhaps what are some of the challenges that they've encountered when engaging in cyber processes. And for our government representatives, I've asked them to reflect on how they see the establishment of successful cooperation between policymakers and non-governmental stakeholders. So after the panelists' initial interventions, we will open the floor for questions. So if you do think of any questions during the session, do feel free to pop them on the chat box, and then depending on how we are with time by the end of the panelists' interventions, we hopefully will be able to answer most of them. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to our first speaker today. I'd like to welcome Adeboye Adegoke, who is the Senior Program Manager at Paradigm Initiative based in Nigeria. Boye, the floor is yours. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks, Daniela, and thanks to ISOC for inviting me to be part of this conversation, and welcome to everybody on the call. My name is Boye Adegoke, and I work with an organization called Paradigm Initiative, where we work on digital inclusion and digital rights across the continent. My initial thought on the subject matter is to speak in terms of my personal experience or our organization experience in engaging cyber policy process in Nigeria and the rest of Africa. We've seen over the years the value and the importance of multi-stakeholder and inclusive approach to cyber policy process. One of the key things that we have seen, for example, is that we have seen very clearly that the expertise that each stakeholder brings to the table differs. And one of the things you would find when you bring different stakeholders together on the table is that different people come with different kinds of expertise. So one of the clear benefits is that you are able to benefit from that diverse expertise that each stakeholder is bringing to the table. It's interesting to see that in most of these processes, you would see that when you sit in your silo, whether as a civil society organization, as academics, or as government representative, it appears as though you have all the answers, as though you can figure out everything. But that only is a bubble until you interact with other stakeholders and you begin to hear other people's perspective, and then you begin to see views and opinions that are totally different from yours and that are equally valid. And so this kind of explains some of an example of what we have seen in terms of value of a multi-stakeholder process to cyber policy development. One of the things it also helps it also helps to confer legitimacy into whatever outcome or that you arrive at in the process. And one of the examples that we have seen, for example, in Nigeria is when you go through a process of enacting a law or coming up with a regulation cyber related, and you do not carry all stakeholders along, you are going to throw up a challenge of legitimacy. We are seeing cases of laws being challenged in courts because of this particular reason. So in order not to take a lot of time, and also given that there are a lot of other speakers on the call who have very valuable insight to share, I'll stop at this point. Just two key points that I've mentioned. They have talked about the expertise that we can benefit from one another, and I've also talked about the importance of legitimacy that it confers on the process. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much, Boye. So that was super interesting. And I would like to now welcome Ms. Nthabiseng Pule, who is the project coordinator and outreach manager at the Cybersecurity Capacity Center for Southern Africa, also known as C3SA. And I would love to hear her perspectives coming from an academic center. So Nthabiseng, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Daniela, and good afternoon or good morning, wherever we are. I am here representing the Southern African Cybersecurity Capacity Center, in short, C3SA. It's a newly established center with the objective of building the cybersecurity response capacity for all countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. This is born out of the observations already made by Daniela that cybersecurity risks are there. They are a reality for all our countries as we move into the digital economy. And without the capacity for governments, which are the policymakers, to manage cybersecurity, Africa will not benefit from the information society that other countries and other continents are benefiting from. Now, talking about stakeholder engagement or involvement in policymaking, I will draw from my experiences first as a regulator in Lesotho in the past, where I worked in a regulatory environment, and a lot of that involved the development of government policy. And then now outside in academia, where we observe and participate as the ones giving feedback, whereas in the past we were the ones coming up with the ideas and asking stakeholders what they think. The lessons from these experiences are, just as we have already learned, is not everybody knows everything. The value of stakeholder consultations is that the policymaker learns a lot more from those interactions than if they close themselves in a room and drafted a policy and just put it out there, because it will lack legitimacy. People will not buy into it. The current experience we have now is the research that we have done in at least one country, where the learning is exactly that when policy has not been on consultation enough, there's no buy-in, and as a result of the lack of buy-in, even government is not successful in what it was trying to do. So it becomes a waste of time and a waste of resources that went into the policy development process. An interesting example that I have on this is when the registration of SIM cards was fashionable. In Lesotho, we intended to start doing the same thing some years back, but there was an intensive consultation with stakeholders. And what we learned from there were two key things. The policy we were trying to put up would be against the digital inclusion policy that we were also pursuing, because a lot of people didn't have national IDs, and if you didn't have a national ID, you might not be able to identify yourself positively to be able to register your phone, your SIM card. And secondly, the areas where people lived were too far from places where they could easily register. So that alone defeated the purpose of digital inclusion. And it would be expensive for everybody. So in the end, we thought maybe the need for SIM card registration should be risk-based. Not everybody has to be registered, and that is what remains in place now. A more controversial thing has just arisen where the government is now thinking of publishing or promulgating in Parliament rules that they call internet broadcasting rules. I don't know if this is something that's done elsewhere, but the idea is that if you have followers on the internet, or you intend to publish something on the internet that will be seen by more than 100 people, then you have to register yourself as an internet broadcaster. And from civil society now, we have drafted a response, and I think it will be a learning on the side of government, because it's possible that the ideas came out of lack of understanding on how things work, and they had the best of intentions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and for those concrete examples. I think it's good to see, you know, those examples bring to life the values that we're talking about, and concepts that perhaps sometimes can be a bit abstract. So that's incredibly helpful. Thank you for that. So next, I want to invite Mr. Sanusi Drammeh, who is the Principal ICT Officer at the Ministry of Information and Communication Infrastructure of the Gambia. So Sanusi, please take it away. You're still muted, Sanusi.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and all other participants in the meeting here. And for the Gambian experience, let me share my slide, sorry. Oops, I don't have... Okay, don't worry about this slide. I can just go on. All right.
I just make you co-hoster so you can share this screen.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay. Let me do that quickly. Okay. I will not be presenting everything, please. Okay, from the Gambian experience, first, I just want to talk about quickly the country profile. We are a country of about close to 2 million people, with a land area size of about 11,295 square kilometers, over 1 billion GDP as of estimates of 2017. We have 5 key TV stations, internet service providers. 2 out of the 3 provide 4G services. We have fixed broadband penetration of 2%, mobile internet 50%, over 2 million subscribers, mobile subscribers, and 4 GSM providers. So the situational analysis of the Gambia is such that our infrastructure is widely considered to be critical. When I mean critical, I mean the internet infrastructure. We have an African coast to Europe submarine cable connecting the Gambia to Europe with a bandwidth capacity of over 100 G. We have ECOWAS wide area network fiber rollout. That was to roll out fiber as the country's backbone, national backbone. This was about 817 kilometers. And then we had another project called the NBN, the National Broadband Network, that complemented that with 420 kilometers. So the ICT market share, ICT services grew by 4.3% as of 2018 estimates, and the share of the GDP is over 1%. We have an investment decreased by 60% in 2018. This was because mainly one of the ISPs was not providing services as required. So going to the main crop of the issue is stakeholder engagement. So we started at a national development stage. While drafting the national development plan, we made sure that stakeholders were engaged from the onset. This was from the public, private, and civil society organizations. This led to the inclusion of cybersecurity as being one of the key deliverables or expected deliverables of the National Development Plan. So this caused awareness. It caused the sectors to be aware, because the National Development Plan is a document that many people in the country know about. So the inclusion of cybersecurity in there made stakeholders aware. But still now there was another challenge. And the other challenge is the understanding, the level of understanding of policy formulation by stakeholders, especially in the civil society sectors. A country like the Gambia, cybersecurity is considered like a new phenomenon. It's not well understood. So what we actually did to cope that, when we were developing the national strategy in 2016, we formulated a national technical committee. This national technical committee comprised of those in the private sector, the civil society, as well as in the public sector. So all of them contributed to the document. So we had divergent views, but we tried to see how we can accommodate all those divergent views into the strategy or the policy. And then from there, we also understood that expertise was an issue, because some sectors do not have expertise in policy formulation. They are mostly actors, they are mostly implementers, they are mostly operators. So the challenge lies there. So where government would lead the process and then involve those stakeholders that are not very conversant with those processes in order to move forward in achieving a meaningful document. One of the key important things that stakeholders outside government would appreciate is transparency. They would want to know how the process has been started and how it would end. So for that being the case, stakeholder involvement is so critical, and also to accommodate their views, and also to have some kind of a consensus-driven approach. And that is also one important aspect. And also to make sure you timely communicate to them, because stakeholders, they always complain that government does not communicate to them in a timely fashion. But when that is done, this gives them the avenue to intervene in the formulation process. So what we did with the cybercrime component, we were drafting a cybercrime bill supported by the Council of Europe. In that process, we constituted a drafting committee. This drafting committee looked at the documents. They were scrutinized before it went into a stakeholder consultative workshop and validation workshops. So this was what happened. And these stakeholders mainly came from the GSM providers, the operators, and some of the civil society organizations, as well as the bar associations. So when it came down to implementation also, we tried to involve many stakeholders from these three sectors. And this has to do with our recent cybersecurity awareness campaign. Why do we do this? We wanted every sector in the government, including the citizenry, to be aware about cybersecurity and the threats that are out there and how they can protect themselves. In so doing, we constituted another committee called a panelist group. This panelist group would stage 3 interviews, panel discussions on 3 TV stations in the country, 6 radio stations, mainly community, and also some private, and 6 print media outlets. This in the effort for people to become aware. And when we were engaging some of the panelists, we saw that their level of expertise and knowledge on cybersecurity was a little bit weak. So as part of our rehearsals for the panel, we made sure that we put them on board, took their views, tried to modify them to certain aspects for them to be able to participate meaningfully to spreading awareness. So I think education is key to build that expertise. Sensitization is key to build that acceptance and or a consensus-driven approach. So these are some of the things that I wanted to highlight. I wanted to talk about a lot of things in this presentation, but I know time doesn't allow me. And I think I hope I have given you enough as expected.
Thank you, Sanusi. That was really, really good. I think you've touched upon so many very important topics. I like the concrete example of a committee with multi-stakeholder representation. I think that's a really good thing to highlight. I like that you highlighted about transparency and the need for that transparency as well as sustained engagement. So it's not going to be possible to just bring people on board for one consultation or like one ad hoc situation and that's it. And the consensus-driven element that you discussed as well, I thought is really interesting, because we know that it is very difficult to reach consensus, obviously, but if we all work towards the same goal, that will help us, I think, sort of compromise sometimes, which will be necessary to, you know, to reach a solution. And yeah, I think that was very interesting. And the capacity building to facilitate engagement, I thought was also super interesting. So thank you very much for that. And I know we'll pick up on some of those points later in the discussion. I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Lillian Nalwoga. Lillian is the program manager at the Collaboration on International ICT Policy in East and Southern Africa, better known as CIPESA. So Lillian, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Daniela. Sorry, I went off for a minute when the previous presenter was speaking. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, depending on wherever you are. Definitely it's an early evening here in Uganda. As Daniela has mentioned, my name is Lillian Nalwoga, and I work with Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. Part of our work and why it is important to this current discussion is that we look at, we do research and conduct advocacy around inclusive ICT policy making processes on the continent. And cybersecurity is indeed one of the things that we look at, because the lack of it makes us not realize the true value of ICTs and their related platforms. And also, one thing is, I think this conversation that we are having today, thanks to global partners and the Internet Society for bringing it up front, is the need for stakeholder engagement in cyber policy making process is one of the many challenges, rather one of the many issues that we've seen that is lacking in policy making, especially cybersecurity making processes on the continent. Why I say this is, one is we've seen in the last 10 years, Africa, in the past 10 years or so, maybe I can say 15, Africa has been on the move towards, you know, adopting internet use and also making policies. But one of the things is, most of these policies lack the stakeholder engagement. Why do we think this is important? We think that, one, when stakeholders are involved in the policy making processes, it builds confidence and trust, you know, in the final product. Because one, they would have been consulted on, and one, they, depending on the different values of the stakeholders, from civil society, we want to see policies that are human rights based, that have, you know, that aspect of the human rights. On private sector has its own also values. They are looking at the government, the academia, and media, and so on and so forth. So when stakeholders are not consulted, they will not have trust in the process. They will not have trust in the policy. Case in example, I'll give an example is, I think we may have colleagues from maybe who are familiar with the cyber computer misuse or cybercrime bill that has gone, that has been in drafting processes in Zimbabwe for quite a long time. This policy, this particular law did not have, you know, stakeholder input. And with time, you've seen that it has been going on and on and on, and the final product has not yet been produced. So when a policy comes, when government presents a final product without the consultation, there's no trust. Stakeholders, various stakeholders will always come back, you know, with concerns. And then the policy, I think, like one of the speakers, Pule, mentioned, will not have, does not have that core value and, what it was developed for. Some of the good practices, however, we've seen also on the continent. I'll give an example of Uganda. In 2010, Uganda embarked on developing cybersecurity laws. This included the Computer Misuse Act. This included, the e-signatures Act, the e-transactions Act. And this was very, I would want to say it took a holistic approach because there were wider consultations, there were meetings, these documents were published online, we provided input. And then when these policies were finally passed in 2011, they came out to be then, as things that we thought would work for us. There wasn't so much, pulling and pushing from the different actors. But of course, also the other example that I would like to give was the drafting of the Data Protection and Privacy Act in Uganda. It started in 2014 and there was a lot of stakeholder input, there were consultations. We were able to participate from the civil society angle, and I think also other actors, the private sector, were able to also, provide their input, even in parliament, the policymakers themselves. This was very inclusive. However, still, yes, there are still challenges with some of these policies, but again, the process we saw that, was a bit, inclusive. And I think there are also examples in Kenya, which Kenya is very good at involving stakeholders, in drafting this. And that is why by the time a law is passed in Kenya, it has gone through some thorough, review and stakeholder input. And well, not all the input that is provided is, is adopted, but again, we've seen it's a best practice. Daniela, I don't know how far, but how much time I have. But what I wanted to find, to maybe highlight is even where there is the engagement, and this is a challenge we are seeing, that even where there's the engagement, there's still, it is not that much. Many times we are not involved in the actual drafting, where we would expect that when you're looking at cybersecurity, because it affects everyone, not just, state actors or private sector, but it affects everyone. Usually these policies come in when they have already been drafted, and changing or amending some of these things does not work. We find ourselves, we just have to adapt to the language and find a way, maybe we can build consensus. So usually civil society and non-government actors, we are labeled as maybe we may not understand these issues, or in some of our governments, governments or policymakers, at times have labeled some of, civil society actions as, just noise making. But these policies come almost in the final stage. It has been, you wake up one day and a policy is being tabled in parliament for the first reading. And you're like, where did it come from? How come we're never consulted? Yet we work, with, we represent different voices, from the community. So that is one of the challenges that civil society is facing. Usually you're slapped, with a policy, and by the time you pull your guns or you pull your resources to provide meaningful feedback, it is already up to. It has gone through the first reading, it's on the second reading, and in 2 weeks, a policy has come up. So this is one of the challenges. And I think the other thing that I would like to highlight, yes, this can change. Policymakers, need to involve right from the start, because it's supposed to be a bottom-up approach. We assume that we assume the responsibility of the citizens, and I know government is supposed to work with civil society, in being the voice of the citizens. So that bottom-up approach is very important. We don't want to just receive policies to provide input and you don't know what is the rationale of this. So we need, policymakers need to get us involved right from the start. But also the other thing is, maybe at times there's the issue of capacity building, and I know it has come up maybe from the previous speakers. some of these, especially, we may have the technocrats, you know, the guys who are in the ministries of ICTs, or, you know, the experts who are doing this. But when they table these things in parliament, who are supposed to have the final vote, they do not understand the issues. So for us to best work with policymakers, we need to be able to be involved, engage, if at all, even civil society can work together with, say, the technocrats in conducting this capacity building. So I'll stop at that and give room for others. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Lillian. I really liked your points around stakeholder engagement, building confidence and trust in that final product, and really the need for this to not be a tick box exercise, and it really needs to be holistic and approach it really in a holistic way, as opposed to just a piecemeal limited opportunities for engagement. So thank you so much. That's been really, really useful. So next I want to invite Mr. Christopher Banda, who is the manager of Malawi's Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT. So Christopher, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Christopher Banda. I work with MWCERT in the regulator, that's Malawi Communication Regulatory Authority. Yeah, thank you very much for putting me part of the panelists to discuss on this very important issue. Basically, myself, I've been so key on the development of the national cybersecurity strategy for Malawi. I was the coordinator for the whole process until it was approved, and now it's in the implementation. So from that aspect, I would just want to share the actual experience which we went through in terms of stakeholder engagement. Maybe just a background a bit. Malawi, we have a national cybersecurity strategy, which was developed starting from 2016, and it was approved in 2019, that is last year, whereby now we're in the implementation stage. But before that, we the registration, electronic transaction, and Cybersecurity Act was enacted in 2016. Yeah, so basically what I want to say is in all of these issues, there were continuous consultations with stakeholders when the legislation was being developed, and also when we are developing the national cybersecurity strategy. However, I would want to say that I think cybersecurity issues in sub-Saharan Africa, especially outside Africa, basically it's a new sector which is just coming in compared to maybe the other sectors. As such, knowledge gap is big. That's the big challenge we're meeting in the stakeholder engagement. Because you find that maybe someone could bring in issues, but you could not get much because of lack of knowledge. However, this is, since it was a starting point, we didn't have the legislation, we didn't have the strategy. We feel that from that, I think we'll build something in the when we'll be reviewing these documents in the near future. The process of the development of the national cybersecurity strategy was quite really vigorous, because we were involving, we tried to involve each and every sector in Malawi. We talk of the banking sector, the telecom sector, government, utility, the security agencies, and including the civil society. Maybe let me say that how we structured ourselves was that at the top we had the steering committee, which was being chaired by the principal sector in the Ministry of ICT, and then in that steering committee we also there was also civil society, like umbrella body, what we call Congress for Non-Governmental Organization of Malawi. That one we took deliberate to put there because we know that civil societies are quite important in such issues, and even including awareness aspect. So we top it from that level of the steering committee so that they can play a big part. However, I think it still goes back to the knowledge aspect. You find that we have yes, civil society within Malawi, but mainly they are on other sectors, not specifically to either technology or maybe to cybersecurity. As such, we could not get much input from them. So I would say knowledge is quite missing from that side. In all these things we are doing, as I said, we started with the steering committee, which was high level, and also we had other working groups. These working groups, we divided them, like the banking sector, they had their own group. The telecoms, they had their own group. The academia and the security agencies for discussion and to have an input in the strategy. So with such kind of approach, it was quite really good because we got input from those groups and we developed the strategy from those input from the input from these groups. We were doing all these issues. One was it's the same issues. We wanted to have, like, the public should have confidence in the document, should have the trust in the document, and also, you know, if you involve the sectors, all the stakeholders, it's easier to lobby for a political commitment in terms of the implementation. You look at budgeting issues. So we were doing those just so that Malawians, everyone should own that those documents. In terms of, I think on the practice example of stakeholder engagement, I think as I've talked about the classification of the stakeholders, be in groups. In that way, they are in the same maybe sector, like the banking sector can talk the same language. The security agencies, they could talk the same language, and then they come up with one thing and contribute. So basically, that's very important to take on board. As I've already said, to say the challenges is okay, lack of specific technologies, civil societies. In case of Malawi, as I say, I would wish to have civil society organizations who are inclined to technology, because we hear other side, but not on the, let's say, cybersecurity or ICT specifically. The reason is maybe because of the lack of knowledge. And then another issue is the external driven agenda. Basically, the challenge we have is instead of maybe coming up with our own local policies or ideas, sometimes we tend to be driven by external forces. Okay, it could be, well, not like a local idea, but because it has been implemented, or maybe it has started somewhere else who are big powers, but then it goes again to say, okay, Malawi, we just take as it is, but we need to look at it and develop something that fits for Malawi or for Kenya, whether Uganda or Ghana, whatever. So basically, I would say these are issues which I would want maybe if to share with you. I think I can stop from there.
Thank you very much for those thoughts, and I really liked what you said about the need to really develop the local ideas and not be driven by perhaps yeah, like, you know, using external you know, models and, you know, frameworks and things like that, which, you know, they're very helpful, but it's tricky to really find how to apply that and how to involve that in a way that works for your country, as opposed to just yeah, just adopting the whole thing. So I think that was really useful. So there is a question in the chat for you, Christopher, from Nthabiseng, which says, when you have groups, in her experience, there is a need to consolidate positions that sometimes might differ significantly. So for example, the interest of security agencies perhaps clashing with those of civil society, like often human rights versus state security. How did you handle that? So I don't know if you've got any immediate thoughts to that question, or maybe we can move on to the next speaker and you can give it a thought, and then we can come back to that. Would that be good?
Yeah, I think let's answer at some point, yes.
Yeah, excellent. Let's do that. So last but not least, I would like to welcome Kenneth Adu-Amanfoh, who is the Executive Director of ACDRO, which is short for Africa Cybersecurity and Digital Rights Organization. He's based in Ghana, so he's going to tell us a bit about his experience with the Ghanaian National Cybersecurity Policy and Strategy. So welcome, Ken, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Daniela, for having me. I congratulate ISOC and GPD for organizing this very important forum on this very important topic, and to all the speakers who have for your excellent, opening remarks. And I also say good afternoon to all our cherished participants who are participating in this forum. Yeah, so I believe that inclusiveness is a good success factor for every policy development in almost every area of governance, and cybersecurity is not excluded. The attackers are united in their efforts in launching their cyber attacks, and why not we as users also coming together, collaborating in our efforts in also defending our cyberspace. So I believe inclusiveness is very key in any policy development, especially in cybersecurity, in an area where the cyberspace is borderless, is open, and security is everyone's business and everyone's responsibility. So I believe that it's important that there is inclusiveness when it comes to putting, whether it's policy development, technical structures, and whatever we need to do, or strategies to make sure that our cyberspace is safe. Over the years in our work, my organization, ACDRO, has been at the forefront trying to champion multi-stakeholder approach in cybersecurity policy development. We've had occasions where we have been an implementation agency for GPD in pushing this forward. A typical example is in the many development of our cybersecurity strategy in Ghana, and also in Sierra Leone, which we use this very approaches, multi-stakeholder approach, and we have seen the success factor that it has yielded. Ghana, if I may use Ghana as a case study, Ghana used a multi-stakeholder approach, or if I may say inclusive approach, trying to bring all different stakeholders together in developing our national cyber security strategy in 2016. And we saw the success factor. We have seen this process even emerge and gone further with the introduction of more multidisciplinary approach in as part of the multi-stakeholder approach, where we brought experts, people, not just bringing stakeholders representing organizations together, but bringing stakeholders who has the expertise to contribute to the successful factor of the policy development. And in the review, in our recent review, National Cybersecurity Policy and Strategy Review, we've seen it, we've used the same approach, and we've seen the success factors. And this has given birth to, everybody participating in our our national launch of Awareness Creation Month. The government launched October as an awareness creation month, just like other countries have done. And we have seen, people from, with no knowledge, so much interested and involved in this process. So I think the process inclusiveness when it comes to cybersecurity policy development cannot be understated, and it needs to be encouraged. I congratulate GPD for putting together the toolkit, which I think is very instrumental for other governments to take hold and implement it. We use the same approach in the development, assisting the government of Sierra Leone to develop their national cybersecurity strategy. And we saw the tremendous, participation of all relevant, organizations. There were institutions or stakeholders that you may even think that they don't even matter, but when you bring them to the table, you'll be amazed how much contribution they can make or contribute to the success of the policy. The policy, I believe that the cyberspace belongs to almost everybody. We all participate, we all use the internet, and we are all responsible for making sure that it is safe. One of the key important factors that we need to know that once you get everybody involved, the development of the policy, when it comes to the implementation of the policy, it becomes so easy for you, because then the policy is not just owned, the policy or strategy implemented is not just owned by government, but it becomes ownership of all the, the various stakeholders that were involved in the process. Whereas if we did not include them in the development process, when it comes to the implementation aspect of it, you see them shining off. They are not going to contribute. So we've seen that success factors in that approach, especially it has been tested in Ghana, and we've seen that it's gone so far and so well. One of the examples that I think countries might want to take up in terms of the inclusive process is that in Ghana, we ensured that we had a structure for the implementation, for the development and implementation of the strategy. We had a high-level interministerial steering committee. And in that interministerial committee, we ensured that the multi-stakeholder approach was reflected in there. In other words, even though it was interministerial committee that comprises of ministers, we had a civil society organization being part of it. And they have a slot. They were also part of that, as an ad hoc members of that committee. And right below that, the technical group, which were, responsible for seeing to the technical implementation. And in there, we also have the civil society group. If I talk about the civil society, I'm talking about the private sector, I'm talking about the academia, and I'm talking about, of course, the NGOs and all that. We're all part of that committee. So the process, what is the approach was right from top down, to the right to the bottom, and that made the implementation really easy and very effective and successful. So I think I'll leave it here, and then I'll speak more to it if there are any questions in that regard. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken. I really liked that you talked about the policy review, because I think we were talking a lot about policy development and a bit about policy implementation, but it's important to understand that this needs to be an approach for all different stages, and the policy review will also be very important, because that will be where we assess the success of a policy, and we think about, so we look backwards to go forward. So I think that was important. And then the other point that I really liked that you mentioned was thinking about some stakeholders that perhaps one would think wouldn't have an interest in cyber policy, but then they do, and they do have expertise to bring that is useful for the process. So I think that's really important to, as a rule of thumb, to be as inclusive as possible. So that has been really great. So thank you to our wonderful speakers for those initial interventions. So I now would like to open the floor for questions. I'm going to look at the chat box to see if anyone has any questions, or if you do want to take the mic, feel free to do that as well.
Maybe could I start responding to what Pule asked?
Yes, please. That would be great.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe what I would say is each country is different in terms of how the environment is, or specifically to the issue of human rights versus state security. I would say during the process, we didn't have issues in terms of consensus when these things were being presented. But as I said, to say, I think though we engaged the civil society, the non-governmental organization in our process, maybe there was a gap maybe to the understanding aspect of the cybersecurity issues. So, but generally, we didn't have any issue relating to these kind of issues, like say crash. All went on well. But I think the key at that time we could pick is that I think knowledge was missing somehow. However, I think as time goes, as people understand things in terms of cybersecurity, we expect maybe more, so that maybe things can be perfected. But otherwise, we didn't have issues at that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for responding to that. Just wanted to highlight the note from Nthabiseng in the chat about the need for a bottom-up approach to cyber policy development, and how a bottom-up approach can really help with crafting the problem statement in a way that is inclusive, and that it really reflects how the other stakeholders see the problem, see the problem statement, and then take it from there, how that can be a really good foundation to start from. So I'm just looking at the chat box to see if we've got any questions for the panelists. I know it's always tricky to be the first one to ask a question, and it's, we need to get used to these new dynamics, but I do want to encourage you to do ask questions, or maybe share some of your thoughts around the topics that the panelists have been discussing. So I have a question, and I think we've already talked about this a little bit, but I would like maybe for panelists to elaborate a bit more on. So we've been talking about what inclusive processes look like, and what are some ways to make them work, and how to structure them, and how they can lead to good implementation. So my question is, what are some of the prerequisites that you have seen that are needed for inclusive processes to work? So for example, government buy-in. So that, it's not in itself sufficient to guarantee a good process or an inclusive process, but I think it can be a good starting point. So are there any other prerequisites that you can think of that you've seen in your work that you could maybe talk about a bit more?
Can I take the floor?
Yeah, please.
Yes. We've seen that policies are usually developed by government and implemented by government. We have different sectors. For instance, if you take the communications sector, and they are developing policies in relation to communications, the communication ministry takes ahead and then oversee the implementation of it. If it's engineering, it goes. If it's agriculture, it's in the same way. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it cuts across. Cybersecurity has international cooperation, since we have a borderless international. So when you take cybersecurity, national security is in there, the communication is in there, finance is in there. You find almost all sectors playing a part in the policy, especially when it comes to implementation of it, the policy. So it's important that when it comes to cybersecurity policy development, we get all the relevant ministries as part of it. And that's why it's important to have a steering committee where all the relevant ministries are part of it, so that then it makes it easy when it comes to implementation. So yeah, that's what I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, can I add?
Yes, of course, please.
Yes, I just want to agree with Kenneth. As our experience with our steering committee, as he has put to say, cybersecurity is a cross-cutting issue. Yes, it's very important to engage, to take on board all the sectors, representatives from all the sectors, to be in that steering committee, high-level committee, because that one is very key, and the stakeholders from other sectors are able to be represented well. So that point is very important. When you are getting that committee, make sure that all sectors, it's not just the telecom sector, but all sectors, banking, academia, utility companies, and all other ministries. Yes, they need to be represented. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's not about just inclusivity with, across stakeholders, but within a stakeholder group such as government, there are still so many actors within. So it is so important that that those actors are coordinated. So I think that's an excellent point. Just wanted to give a chance to the other panelists to see if they would like to add some thoughts.
Yes, Daniela?
Yes,
Can I? Yes.
Yes.
Another challenge that I have seen, and my friend Banda talked about it a bit, is sometimes policy is imported from somewhere else. In the region, we also import policy from the regional bodies like the Southern African Development Community. That almost automatically excludes the bottom-up approach, because policy comes from the region and the country just gets on with putting it in place. So I don't know if there's a way that maybe stakeholder engagement can still happen at the regional level so that we avoid some of the problems that you find emanate after that policy has been implemented.
That's a really, really good point. And I like that in thinking about how we need to tailor policies really to the local context. And I guess that balance between I think some of those templates and frameworks can be really helpful, but how do we get, I guess, to engage in the development of those templates and frameworks themselves so that they do reflect the different perspectives, and then when we're going to implement them at the national level, how do we do that in a way that serves the country and we're not just adopting something that won't work. So I don't know if any of the other panelists have thoughts about that. Perhaps I see you, Boye, that you want to take the floor. I know you guys engage at the regional level, so it would be great to get your perspective, and then we'll go to Lillian.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Daniela. Yeah, I just want to, also add my voice to one of the perspectives that was shared in the group chat, especially with respect to the need to consolidate positions where there are, different stakeholder groups where they differ significantly on an issue. An example was cited of security clashing with civil society point of view. What I think is key to inclusive process or multi-stakeholder process is that it's important to go there with an open mind, to go to the table with an open mind, and also to know what are the core issues in terms of your perspective, whether as a human rights advocate or as a civil society actor, what are the core issues on which you cannot compromise? Then what are the core issues on which you can probably shift ground and all of that? So what is not helpful is when you go to the table to maintain that it has to be your way 100%. That does not help the process. And also in terms of security, the friction between security and say privacy, for example, one of the things that I have seen or I found out in one of the reports that I authored recently on digital privacy, and rights, what I discovered, one of the reasons for this friction is because we have always presented the problem in a way that seems to suggest that privacy and security, for example, are two mutually exclusive terms, which does not help the conversation. I think in a lot of this conversation, the question we need to be answering is not whether people should give privacy away in order to have security. The question we should be asking is how do we ensure that privacy right is not violated even while we are trying to make sure that we provide security for the people. So that's an example of how to frame questions during this roundtable discussion and conversation. One last point that I also want to speak to is also in terms of ensuring inclusiveness. I think one of the things that we have seen is that from the perspective of government stakeholders, it's easier to identify, leading civil society voices and bring them to the table. But the truth of the matter is that there are more voices that may not be popular, that may not have the kind of clout. So a clear example of what we have done as part of the initiative, for example, was when we were invited by the Nigerian government to submit a memo regarding Nigeria Draft Data Protection Bill. One of the things we did is we called for an open webinar and we invited different organizations, civil society, organizations, academics, and said, let's talk together, let's come together, let's look at this document together. So we serve as a coalition center whereby we collated different voices and say this is what civil society are saying. So sometimes in our privileged position as leading civil society organization, we must also recognize that there are a lot of other voices who may not have the opportunity to be on the table. We can use our position to bring those voices together and ensure that we collate their voices and present it and stand as their representative when sitting with governments and other actors on the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Boye. Lillian, over to you.
Thanks, Daniela. My intervention kind of responds to the question from Ms. Chen on how to cooperate cross-border with cybersecurity in so many questions, in so many countries in Africa. Diplomacy conflict, or should diplomats need to have capacity building or capacity cybersecurity policy? Okay, what I'll try to understand with this question is, I think one of the other things that we need to look into is most of the times these policies are cut and paste, that something that happens, you find a policy is the same in maybe in Uganda, in Kenya, and then when it's taken to, stakeholders, they present these issues. So we would need to have maybe some bit of benchmarking, because we know most of these policies don't seem to work. Policy making and technology, they don't move at the same pace. So while we are addressing something, about particular cybercrime definition or whatever it is, a technical term, something else comes up, So we need to have a benchmarking, where in which countries, for instance, in the region, do we see that are having maybe strong, what do we consider as strong cyber policy law or policy or framework? And then we can see how do they get to that. But for now, I don't know if there's really a country I can try to pinpoint to and say that this particular country has their cybersecurity framework that is working and this is how they did it. Or maybe there are some aspects that can be, copied, or maybe, copied. I don't want to use the word copying, but something that can be, picked on and see how it can be improved. So that cross-border cooperation, at times it doesn't work, Some countries, I know at the East African level, there's been some bit of incorporation, say with the East African, bodies. But again, there are challenges because when countries are drafting, they are drafting as individual countries. So by the time it escalates at the regional, then you find some countries are not at the same level. So probably would need to have something more at regional level, and then it gradually goes to, to the national level. But again, on the issue of capacity building for diplomats, I think, yes, that can be done. It's a bit of a tricky question, but yes, like we said, there's the issue of capacity, lack of awareness of what are the current issues or perceived issues. Like, for instance, I've seen a question on quantum key distribution. I really don't understand these technical terms, and I don't really think that some of our policies at the moment really address these issues. So you see, as technology advances, our policies just keep dragging on, and it's a cut and paste, from different countries. So we need to address some of those challenges. I don't know if anyone can address the quantum key distribution.
Yes, so I think so. So that's quite a specific one. So there's a question around any experience related to security in the post-quantum cryptography environment and the quantum key distribution, which I think it's quite a specific thing, but then the question goes on to, I think, a broader element, which is the gap in technical understanding by government and policymakers and how that gap is perhaps widening. So how can we involve them more so that they understand the dangers or opportunities of these technologies? And I think that's a really useful point. And we had already touched upon sort of the value of stakeholder engagement being the different types of expertise. So we've agreed that no single stakeholder will have all the expertise needed to tackle every single cyber threat out there, but that's what the value of stakeholder engagement is, to bring those different stakeholders that bring different types of expertise. However, I think what this question is raising, which I think is very important, it's true that we don't all need to have the expertise, every type of expertise, but how do we manage perhaps that gap in the expertise and perhaps the gap in understanding from the policymakers who are drafting some of these policies, if they lack the technical understanding of even how these technologies work. So I don't know, I think it is a complex question, but I don't know if any of the panelists would like to have a go at addressing that.
Thank you, Daniela. I would like to give it a try.
Yeah.
I think we have to change the process. The policymakers have to start thinking about policy in a more agile way. First, you don't do it once and forget about it. And secondly, in the build-up towards the policy document being developed, I think a lot of open discussions and now with the social media and other digital tools available, it's just a matter of putting a topic out there and opening it up for discussion. Sometimes you open up a webinar, sometimes you put it on Twitter. More of the engagement that is also educational, I think, would help the policymaker to end up with a policy that people can make an input to because they understand what the issues are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and also I would like to add to that, concerning these emerging technologies or emerging threats, it's very important because we cannot be specific in every policy document or a strategy to say a particular emerging technology has to be tackled this way or that way. But we can have categories of emerging technologies and say that government or stakeholders need to approach addressing these emerging technologies using, number one, for example, education, spread the awareness about the threats and the impacts of such technologies on the citizenry, and for how stakeholders can collaborate and coordinate to mitigate such threats. Things like that would be really, and also deterrence in cybercrime laws, because it sums up a lot of things. Unauthorized access to computer data or with intent or to modify or something like that. Those things, they encompass all the threats that come underneath it. So it would be very important for policymakers to look at it at a policy standpoint and make statements that are accommodating of future interventions. For example, these new technologies of quantum key distribution and stuff like that. That's my take. Education is one of the key things.
Excellent, thank you. So we've got another question around how COVID has affected the implementation of national cybersecurity strategies, and government priorities have understandably changed since March. So more than ever, cybersecurity should be a top priority. How do you plan to approach the situation at the government level? So in particular, I think for Sanusi and Banda, if you have any thoughts that you would like to share about how you're planning to approach this at the governmental level, or how you already are doing it, I would like to give you the chance to give your thoughts first, and then invite the other panelists to share their perspectives.
Very much. What I want to say is, I think COVID, yes, has affected a lot of issues in terms of implementation of maybe policies and so. However, you know, everyone has moved to, have moved digital. Everything now is online, which has put again to government to prioritize ICT. You know, previously, ICT issues, yes, were being prioritized, but not much. Because when things are put across to government, they will say, okay, no, we need to prioritize, you know, people are, maybe there is hunger, okay, maybe education issues. They will put other priorities, but not the ICT. But now COVID, how it has come and everyone has gone online, this gives now a message to government to say, can we prioritize this issue? So that is including even the cybersecurity issues, because again, the attacks have increased even in the period. So it's an opportunity that this challenge has brought something, possibly an aspect of a practical awareness to government to say, no, we need to act in a different way, or we need to think in a different way in relation to implementation of ICT related activities. So I just want to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Sanusi, is there anything you would like to share?
Yes, in fact, we have experience as a government in the Gambia here, the effects of this COVID-19 disrupting some of our implementation of our activities, including the implementation of our national cybersecurity strategy and action plan. And this has caused us to re-strategize. And in that re-strategization process, we had to take opportunity of the digital tools that are available, and such as these online meeting platforms, in order to deliver some of the in order to achieve some of the deliverables of the action plan. And one of them is the sensitization, or the awareness, national awareness, cybersecurity awareness campaign. We wanted to use TV. Also, we want seminars. We wanted to use the Zoom platforms, and also we are already conducting. Even today, there's a training hosted by the GMCERT, the Gambia Computer Security Incident Response Team, involving many stakeholders. So those are some of the ways that you can re-strategize, use technology to tackle the pandemic. And one interesting thing, we had someone who had a vulnerable or out of date or a 0-day attack on one of the Zoom clients. And we had this infiltrator who came into the Zoom meeting, and it was chaotic. Everybody had to leave. But that was an eye-opener for the policymakers in order for them to prioritize and really feel the essence or the impact of what cybersecurity incidents can look like. So that was an eye-opener, and there was a high delegation in the meeting. So I wanted to share this. Technology can be used as a tool to tackle or to circumvent.
Yeah.
But of course, those technologies have to be strengthened. Their
Thank you, Sanusi, for that. So we've got time for one last question that I'm seeing on the chat box. And how does cybersecurity policy development overcome the barriers of national security vis-a-vis, for example, human rights? I think we've started touching upon this, and Boye was mentioning how framing matters. And if we frame these two concepts as mutually exclusive, then you know how the conversation will go if we frame it like that, versus if we frame them as needed, right? As mutually enforcing, really. So I would like to give a chance to some of our other panelists to see if they've got any thoughts that they would like to share about this potential tension between national security and human rights.
Yes, let me attempt to do that. Yeah. So national security. Sorry, my network is bad, so I couldn't even see the question in the chat. Yeah, but I think national security sees all forms of security as their responsibility. They see cybersecurity also as a national security issue. They don't see the reason why civil society should be part of national security discussion. And so that is when Ghana was doing the structure. We try to put them, the civil society, as members of the stakeholder, but in an ad hoc basis. So when it comes to really national security issues with cyber, they don't have such meeting, but they are getting involved. But having said that, I have seen national security campaigns, organization within Africa trying to embrace the need. I've seen the effort. I think that barrier is breaking. That tension is loosening up a little bit, and we've seen the involvement coming up. I can give you an example of Ghana used to run the Security Governance Initiative, which was a bilateral, partnership with the U.S. government and the Ghana government, and it's the same with other African countries. And this initiative was being spearheaded by the national security, but we had participation. The working group had participation from the civil society, academia, NGOs, and all that. They were all part of it, but this was being chaired by. So I think that tension is loosening up a little bit. And I wanted to add, make a comment on Ms. Chen's question of diplomacy conflict. Yeah, I think that can also, that tension has been there, and that tension is loosening up. The good thing is that we have our foreign ministry that already have their diplomacy, collaboration, and that persists. So that's why it's important to also bring the foreign ministry as part of the cybersecurity stakeholders, so that when it comes to diplomacy, they can spearhead and lead that, because they already have, as part of their job, they already engaged. So, I think that is loosening up within the African continent as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. And I am very sorry, but unfortunately we have run out of time for today's session. So I want to wrap up. I think we touched upon very important topics, the why and the value of stakeholder engagement, and the legitimacy, ownership, and buy-in that stakeholder engagement brings, the different expertise, and how not one single stakeholder knows everything about cyber. So how stakeholder engagement can really inform, create better informed policies. We saw some examples about the how and how to engage stakeholders in processes via consultations and committees and working groups, and using, posting documents online, inviting feedback. We've talked about the need for stakeholder engagement to be holistic and to be sustained, and to approach it not as a tick box exercise, but as a really meaningful exercise. We've talked about the need for transparency, capacity building to facilitate meaningful engagement, and last but not least, trust, and how trust is key to make multi-stakeholder processes work, but also how multi-stakeholder or engagement, inclusive engagement, builds trust. So I would like to thank my brilliant colleagues on the panel today. Usually I would ask for a round of applause, but for the sake of everyone's eardrums, we're not going to do that, but a virtual applause to them. I would like to thank everyone who has joined the session today and has submitted their questions. Thank you again to ISOC for hosting the webinar, making sure that everything went smoothly. Do check out the other webinars that they will be running under the Global Cyber Forum, and also feel free to share the recording of this session once it's up. So thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye. Thank you, Danny, for that excellent moderation. And to Oscar and all of you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.